guys, welcome back to Languistic. I'm excited to continue our journey towards mastering the intricacies of English writing. If you're new here, hello, welcome. My name is Korrah, and I'm your English language teacher here with Languistic. We're about to continue on part 2 of how to improve your writing by exploring common grammar errors that tend to arise. If you haven't checked out part 1, now is the time. The link is in the description below. Here we laid the foundation by exploring the building blocks of effective sentence and paragraph structure. Whereas today, we're really going to dive in deep to the content and the heart of our writing. We're going to focus on the words within our sentences. We're going to think about grammar concepts such as subject-verb agreement, verb tenses, and the use of apostrophes. So without delaying it any further, let's get into it. All right, let's take a look at subject-verb agreement. Now, subject-verb agreement is a grammatical rule that states that the subject and the verb should be in agreement with each other, basically. Remember from part 1 that a subject is who or what the sentence is about, whereas the verb is the action or the state that is occurring. We want the subject, if it's singular, for the first verb that follows it to also be singular. On the other hand, if the subject is plural, then we also want to make sure that the verb that follows it is also plural. Why this is important is because the audience will not understand whether you meant that it was singular or plural. I just want to note, do not let the words between the subject and the verb confuse you, okay? So those filler words or the other words in the sentence, don't get confused about them because it really can be misleading. So find the subject and then find the verb that follows it. Let's look at the first one. Each of the cats have their own toy. And second, each of the cats has its own toy. Now, why this is confusing is because cats is plural. So is cats the subject or is it each? We have to think about that because each would be singular, but cats is plural. What is the first subject you see in that sentence? Next one here. My family lives in different countries and it creates challenges during holidays. That should say holidays, period. There's a little typo there. Next, we have my family lives in different countries and it creates challenges during holidays. What do you think is correct? Each of the cats has its own toy. That's correct. So each singular cat has its own toy. We're talking about the singular cat each time. Whereas on the other hand, we need to make sure that it's plural. Tips to avoid the errors. As I mentioned before, identify the first subject, and that should be a telltale sign. Next is compound subjects. So for times that we use the word and, because there's two subjects we're putting together, use a plural verb because we're talking about two different cases here. For example, John and Sarah. There's two of them. Are, right? We wouldn't say John and Sarah is because John and Sarah, two of them together would be plural. So they are going to the movies tonight. Study your irregular verbs and look out for them because obviously it's quite simple when we use regular verbs that we already know and have practiced a lot, but often irregular verbs will come up. So make sure you know your conjugations and study them and remember them. So what is an indefinite pronoun? It's a pronoun that does not specifically refer to any person, thing, or amount. Instead, it refers to non-specific or unidentified individuals, objects, or quantities. And we use this when the speaker doesn't need to or cannot identify the exact noun that it's being referred to. Let's take a look at some examples. Everyone wants to be successful. When we're talking about everyone, we're talking about one body of people, even though there's many people there. So it's singular. We want to make sure that the verb that follows it is singular as well, which is why we made it wants. Next, we have many are attending the event. Now we're talking about many subjects. So we're going to use the verb are instead of is. And somebody has left their jacket behind. Well, somebody, we don't know who we're talking about, but we know that it's one person. So we're going to use has instead of have. And finally, we have both enjoy reading books. So both, there's two subjects, they both enjoy. Rather than if it was singular, we would say he enjoys. All right, and finally, we have numbers and amounts. Choose the correct verb form based on the noun that's closest to the verb. You should focus on the main noun that is closest to it. And the one closest to the verb will determine its number, singular or plural. This is the noun that dictates the form of the verb you should use to maintain proper subject verb agreement. Next grammar error that can arise is the use of apostrophes. Now, everyone should know what an apostrophe is. It's that little dash that we use in between certain words. So many apostrophe errors happen because the apostrophes are not being used correctly. So we want to keep an eye out for contractions and possessive pronouns. Now, a contraction is the combination between two words where we take out some letters and combine them into one to form a singular word, where a possession is showing ownership or possession of something. And this actually replaces the noun, so we don't need an apostrophe to show possession. And finally, which is on a rare occurrence, I would say, is when we want to pluralize letters and numbers. A perfect example of this is the famous idiom, mind your P's and Q's, which basically means to watch your behavior and be on your best behavior. So, to sum that up, contractions need apostrophes, possessions do not. Let's take a look at some examples. So, I want you to try to guess whether the sentence needs an apostrophe or not. For the first example, we have the cat chased its tail. Next, we have I have three cats. And finally, we have they're going to the park. So the cat chased its tail is a possession because the cat owns its tail. It's the cat's tail. We don't say the cat chased it is tail. That wouldn't make sense. Next is also a possession. I own three cats. They're my cats. I wouldn't say I have three cat is. And finally, they're going to the park. Now, this one is a contraction because we are saying they are. We're taking out the A and we're just saying they're. Also, think about it, right? The park is not theirs. They don't own the park, but they are going to the park. This is quite informal. I would not recommend using apostrophes for contractions if you're writing an academic or formal report. This will also help you avoid some apostrophe errors. Some tips to avoid apostrophe errors. So, number one and number two go together. Check the context and know their purpose. Are you showing a contraction or are you showing a possession? Because if you're showing a contraction, you need an apostrophe, whereas if you're showing a possession, you do not. On the other hand, if you're talking about plurals and making something a plural form, you do not need an apostrophe, okay? They are not used to make nouns plural. Last but not least, we have verb tenses. Verb tenses convey the timing and sequence of actions or events. So we want to make sure that throughout our writing, there is a consistent verb tense, especially if you're writing a formal or academic paper. Common verb tense errors is the confusion of different tenses. So let's take a look at some cases of the verb tenses being confused and mixed up. In the first one, we have a confusion between the present and past tense. Is it she goes to the store yesterday or she went to the store yesterday? She goes is present tense, but yesterday happened before. So to fix this, we would say she went to the store yesterday. Next, we have future tense in the past context. So sometimes people get confused and use future, which hasn't happened yet, in the past context. So an example of this is she will go to the store yesterday, or she went to the store yesterday. Finally, we have incorrect sequence of tenses. This means that the order of the tenses are not correct. Conditional tense refers to a grammatical construction to express that something is hypothetical or uncertain. It could happen, but it is dependent on a certain condition being met. If I will have time, I will come is considered less standard in English grammar. Generally, we use the simple present tense after if clauses rather than the future tense. So the correct form would be if I have time, I will come. And finally, we have past perfect tense for recent past. Past perfect tense is a grammatical tense used to describe an action that was completed before another past action or point in time. Shows the sequence of events in the past to describe and emphasize an action that happened first. This is the recent past that just happened, whereas this is the past perfect tense because it happened before. In summary, she had just arrived refers to an action that happened before another past action or time, whereas she has just arrived refers to an action that happened in the past with a focus on its relevance to the present moment. Tips to avoid verb tense errors, okay? Other than studying and knowing your verb tenses really well, which is pretty challenging, especially when you're communicating, my first tip is to identify the time frame. Consider, is this past, present, or future? And pay attention to time words. Stay consistent throughout your writing. Pick a tense and stick to it. Choose your tense wisely, okay? So as you can see, past perfect is quite challenging to wrap your head around. Use this sparingly in your writing. Unless you're talking about an event that happened before the recent past, I would opt away from using past perfect within your writing. And avoid unnecessary future tense. The reason I say this is don't use it when the context already indicates a future action. You don't need to be repetitive. And finally, understand sequence, okay? Maintain a logical sequence of events using the appropriate tenses. This is pretty confusing, but I will get a video out for you guys soon where we talk about verb tenses in greater detail and how to know the difference and how to use them in your writing, because this is a loaded topic that we could talk about in a lot of detail. Thank you so much for tuning into part 2. I hope this video was helpful and insightful, and there were some key takeaways that you can use within your writing to feel more confident in your written communication. Thank you so much, and I will see you soon.